Machiavelli's The Prince, Key Concepts. Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince is arguably the most popular book about politics ever written. Its observations about human behavior are as true today as they were 500 years ago. In this book, Machiavelli offers advice to politicians regarding how to gain power and how to keep it. Although modern readers think that a prince is someone who is destined to inherit control of his country, the princes of Machiavelli's time were by no means that secure. In fact, the prince had to be careful to keep the support of his citizens if he wanted to remain in power. The methods that Machiavelli suggests for leaders to keep public support are just as relevant for today's elected officials as they were for leaders of the 16th century. This video lecture introduces our viewers to the key concepts and themes of Machiavelli's The Prince. Hence, in what follows, I will briefly sketch the key concepts of this famous book. The discussion is divided into two major parts, namely, first, I will present the main arguments of a chapter, or a group of chapters, although it must be noted that there are no formal divisions between its 26 chapters. And second, I will present the major themes of the book. Chapters 1 to 11. As already intimated above, there are no formal divisions between the 26 chapters of The Prince. However, it is easy to see that Machiavelli's work has been arranged in 4 distinct sections. The first 11 chapters discuss the various kinds of principalities that are possible, introducing readers to the strengths and weaknesses of each type. The beginning of this section starts with discussions of contemporary Italian politics, a subject that will be dropped by the end of this section. Here, Machiavelli looks at examples from antiquity, which is meant to underscore the scholarly aspect of The Prince. One of the central themes of the book is that a ruler should never leave anything to chance. Hence, rulers cannot rely on fate or on the support of others, for it will usually end up proving unreliable. Machiavelli then explores possible ways for a prince to come to power. Chapters 12 to 14. In this section, Machiavelli discusses ways for a political leader to organize his military, which is the most important function of a ruler. First, he examines the use of mercenary soldiers, that is, men who are hired to fight, usually from a different country, and explores the problems with this method. For instance, he contends that history shows that mercenaries are motivated only by money. Therefore, if there is a disruption in payment, the mercenaries will not fight. Also, soldiers from other countries might lack the nationalistic fervor to fight hard for a certain cause or ruler. Moreover, he offers direct, specific advice for how political leaders should handle their armies. They should, for instance, always have an enemy. Hence, in this section, Machiavelli recommends that steps be taken so that the soldiers do not get bored, for then they will get themselves into trouble. Chapters 15 to 23. Like the first section of the book, the third spans the length of several chapters. The focus in this section is the prince's subordinates and associates. It is in this section that the book's famous rejection of conventional morality can be found. Machiavelli proposes the idea that one who is a leader does not need to return loyalty with loyalty. This is because for Machiavelli, the only thing the prince owes his subjects is military success. If the rest of the book functions as a textbook, teaching old stories and traditional wisdom to young rulers who are curious about rulers from the past, this third section functions as a political tract, suggesting changes that need to come about if the prince is to rule effectively. It is also important to note that the first half of this section examines examples from history, while the second half emphasizes the present and the future. Chapters 24 to 26. This final section has been viewed as a patriotic call to arms, as Machiavelli encourages the prince to take good care of Italy, act prudently, and leave nothing about his country or his subjects to chance. As with the second section, the rhetoric rises throughout the course of these few chapters. The book ends as it began, examining contemporary Italy, leaving examples from history in the past. Themes of the book: on politics and how should a prince be perceived by the public. It is important to note that prior to Machiavelli, political theorists judged a prince's reign on how moral the prince was. Did he go to church? Did he sin? Was he a good man? Yet with the prince, Machiavelli contended that it wasn't how moral the prince actually was, but how he was perceived by his subjects. In other words, appearance was all that mattered. It didn't matter what a prince did in private, as long as he was upstanding, honest, and fair in public. On fate and chance. The concepts of fortune and virtue are recurring themes in The Prince. Although these words can mean a variety of things, for Machiavelli, fortune refers to those events that are beyond human control, and virtue means the things people can do to control fate. It would be counterproductive for a how-to manual of this type to use fortune to explain most of life's events. The point of Machiavelli's book is to recommend the most effective tactics to stay in power, not to put a damper on his activities. He estimates that half of our actions may be caused by fortune, while free will controls the other half. But for Machiavelli, fortune has the greater significance because when it asserts itself, it is like a raging flood, washing away all that is on its path. Continuing with the flood metaphor, Machiavelli notes that virtue can control the flow of fortune in the same way that dikes and dams control a flood. Rather than using the idea of fate or luck as an excuse, as a great many theorists do when things do not work out as expected, Machiavelli warns princes that they must prepare themselves against fortune, and be ready to change their methods in order to accept what fortune brings. Yet, because of this, Machiavelli has more admiration for rulers who are reckless than those who are cautious. The cautious ones are fooling themselves about how much they really control their fate. On deception. According to Machiavelli, political leaders should be allowed to deceive their subjects. The test of a politician is not how well he keeps his word, but whether he is perceived to be honest. It is not Machiavelli's goal to uphold morality, but to advise political leaders on the best way to strengthen their power. For him, the best way to remain in power is to tell the people what they want to hear, whether it is true or not. According to this theory, it would actually be detrimental for a prince to tell the truth all of the time. In fact, Machiavelli explains that a prudent ruler cannot observe faith, nor should he, when such observance turns against him, and the causes that make him promise have been eliminated. Later in the same paragraph, he adds, nor does a prince ever lack legitimate cause to color his failure to observe faith. Observing faith, like keeping faith, means to remain true and honest. With these lines, Machiavelli is telling readers that the prince should break his promises when circumstances change, and then lie about why he broke his promise. As we can see, as Machiavelli would have us believe, this sort of moral relativism, that is, changing one's ethical code from one situation to the next, is effective for retaining the prince's hold on power, even though it violates most systems of ethics. Lastly, on war and peace. In Machiavelli's time, countries were constantly at war with one another. Therefore, the ability to effectively lead during wartime was a much more important measurement of a politician than it is in contemporary times. Much of the political theory in The Prince is centered on a principality's ability to defend itself against attacks. Machiavelli approves of a strong army, but he cautions a prince to create such a force from his own subjects, and to not rely on mercenaries or on soldiers borrowed from other lands. And lastly, it is important to note that Machiavelli does approve of taking control of other countries through military aggression.